How's it going, everyone? I'm Crysis, and if you haven't guessed by now, I love movies. Enough to the point that before the month of May, I had already seen 62 movies, and this month added 20 to that count. Again, when you have as many free tickets as I do, which has now increased, you take advantage of that, even if it means you see some movies that are less than good. So, without further ado, let's get into the reviews. Starting off the month, I checked in and saw Rosario, and despite being labeled as a horror movie, it was really anything but. It started off promisingly enough, but there were too many twists, turns, and strange choices made in the filming and editing room that it turned into a not great movie in the end. On the acting side of things, it was mostly bad to okay, and I wish the main actress had been told that she didn't have to vocalize every single gasp or grunt of pain because it got really annoying after a while and it felt like I was watching an anime. For the story, it was fairly typical dead grandma, blizzard that traps the protagonist in the old creaky building, weird shit going on almost immediately, and the only thing shocking about it was the ending, but even then, it didn't really work for me. Granted, it could be that I just wasn't the target audience, so I can't quite relate to it as much, but yeah, it just didn't hit the target. Plus, the final scene makes it seem like there's supposed to be a sequel, but I highly doubt that's going to happen. For the filming, there were so many Dutch angle shots that it felt like this was filmed in the Netherlands, and on the editing side, there were quite a few scenes that felt like they used either audio from a different shot or had to ADR what was said because the voice just felt unnatural and the character's back was to the camera. Overall, it was just a very strange movie and not in a good way. For me, this movie only gets a 4 out of 10. Up next was one of the best movies of the month and one of the best Marvel movies since Endgame in Thunderbolts. Not only is this movie a good entry in the MCU, it's just a great movie in general. The whole movie is a fantastic ride from start to finish, and it continues the story of the greater Marvel Cinematic Universe in a way that feels natural and didn't try too hard to be something it wasn't. The entire cast brought their A games, from the returning cast of Florence Pugh, David Harbour, Wyatt Russell, Hannah John Kamen, Sebastian Stan, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, to the new additions to the universe in Lewis Pullman as Bob, who was one of the best parts of this whole movie. My favorite thing about it, though, would have to be that it didn't fall into the familiar recent Marvel trap of interjecting unnecessary humor into tremendously serious moments, and instead it let the serious moments be serious and the funny moments be funny. There was just something innately charming about this movie, and it has easily slipped into my top 10 favorite Marvel movies, if not the top 5. For all these reasons and many more that I won't detail because of spoilers, it's getting an 8.5 out of 10. Ending that first weekend was The Surfer, starring Nicolas Cage. And if all Nicolas Cage movies are this weird, I think I'm fine skipping them after having sat through this one, his latest strange flick about, well, surfing. It's honestly just a comedy of misfortune for Nicolas Cage's character, and it never gets better throughout the course of the movie. It felt like whoever wrote this movie did so while on a bad trip, while also suffering from an Australian heat stroke, and it showed so much. Everything was just so strange and weird and unnecessary half the time, and the ending just makes it worse, honestly. The acting was too much, but I mean, the Australian setting was nice, I guess, but other than that, it was just all too much all at once. It also felt like it dragged on way too long despite only being an hour and a half, and it was just all around not a fun time or experience. So for that, it's gonna get a 3.5 out of 10. The first of two screen unscenes of the month. Up next was the Josh Hartnett led Fight or Flight. While it's not a bad movie on its own necessarily, it also doesn't raise the bar of the action movie set on a mode of transportation genre. From the story to the acting to the special effects, especially later in the movie, it all falls mostly flat, including the ending, which isn't really an ending, but instead sequel bait for a movie that probably won't get made. Josh Hartnett does fine in his role as the lead, showing the crazed way that some people deal with crises, but even his performance devolves quickly into just pure madness in a role that doesn't really need it. I did keep getting distracted whenever Julian Kostov was on screen, if only because I was jokingly wondering where Price and Soap were to take out Makarov, but that's beside the point. He did fine in his role, Katie Sackhoff did fine in hers, but the way that everything supposedly ties together in the end is just weird and does not work. Bullet Train but Plane just did not land in any aspects, which is why it really only gets a 5.5 out of 10. Up next was another movie that could be described as it's not bad, but with Clown in a Cornfield. What starts off as your typical schlocky slasher horror comedy movie quickly turns into a generational conflict, old versus young debate, and it just makes no sense. So many things are said as throwaway lines early in the movie that come back around throughout the movie, but they don't really mean anything. One thing that isn't the fault of the movie itself, more so the marketing department for the distribution company, is that most, if not all, of the good kills and comedic bits are shown in the trailer, so you're mostly just watching the in-between stuff in order to get from kill to kill, comedic bit to comedic bit. It just felt lackluster in the slasher genre, which is hard to do if I'm being honest. It felt like there was a much better story to be told here that just wasn't. So it's getting a 5 out of 10. Next on the docket was Words of War, a biopic telling the story of Anna Politkovskaya and her life as a Russian journalist. And I gotta say, first things first, the absolute tungsten balls on the creators of this movie are insane. To make a movie so critical of a foreign leader to the point of calling him a thug and a gangster multiple times is insane and commendable at the exact same time. For the movie itself, it was really good. There was a comedic narrative device of character says something, immediate scene transition to another character yelling at the first character for the first character doing the thing that they said. That was used twice. And like, while I understand the need to have some levity in such a serious movie, it felt odd to use it not only twice, but very close together in terms of when it happens during the runtime. The acting was solid from everyone, with specific praise going to Maxine Peake as Anna Politkovskaya and Jason Isaacs as her husband Sasha. Although I will say that it was very strange to hear Russian characters speaking with an English/British accent. It was interesting to see how, with how much the world has changed, so many things have stayed the exact same since 2006. With all things considered, it gets an easy 9 out of 10. Ending that weekend with a doubleheader, I walked into Juliet and Romeo first. Out of all the genres in the world, why did they have to turn the most famous love story in the whole world into a musical? Especially one where the music doesn't do anything for the plot or even the romance. The music was fine, nothing special, and definitely not on the level of any Broadway show, past or present. But the lip syncing was blatantly obvious with some of the songs the actors had not showing any kind of stress or emotion when singing powerful notes. Music aside, though, it was also very strange to me how this cast had two bigger name actors in Jason Isaacs and Rebel Wilson, but then barely had them in the movie at all, especially Rebel Wilson, who can actually sing. The actors for the star-crossed lovers were fine, and their chemistry did feel realistic, or at least as realistic as it can be with this specific story. Toward the end of the movie, there were a lot of flashbacks to earlier scenes in the movie, which honestly just served to pad the runtime, as they didn't add anything new that we hadn't already seen. The whole movie could be described as a meal entirely made of cotton candy. Altogether too much, with hardly any substance. I will say, though, it is funny how this smaller budget movie had better costuming and choreography than the bigger budget Snow White movie from this year, though. Unfortunately, the highs of this movie weren't enough to truly cancel out the lows, earning this adaptation a 4 out of 10. The second movie of this doubleheader was Watch the Skies, a Solidly okay movie. A weirdly touching tale about found family, even if that found family is a mildly crazed UFO cult. Watch the Skies is also a great story about the search for something lost and the lengths that we go to find it. The story itself was great, though it did feel like it ran in circles at times, going through the same events multiple times just to end up at the same conclusion every time, save for the last few minutes of the movie pre-credits. The acting itself was fine from everyone, with a shout out to Inez del Toro as the young Denise, though sometimes it felt as though they ADR'd entire scenes with Swedish accented English. It made it hard to focus on the actual movie during those scenes because I was too focused on the disconnect between the actors' movements and emotions and the emotions from the dialogue. It didn't really hurt the movie too much, but it was mildly hard to focus on anything other than the oddities that weren't supposed to be the focus for those scenes. Not a bad movie overall, though not entirely out of this world amazing either. And I actually did find out post-watch from the trivia section on IMDb that the reason the mouth movements felt so off is because the filmmakers used some kind of AI technology to synchronize lip movements and facial expressions to newly recorded English dialogue, which made it appear as though the film were originally shot in English. But honestly, I would rather have watched the movie in Swedish than in English because the result looked weird as the final product of the movie. Overall, it was just slightly better than okay, which earns it a slightly better than average 6 out of 10. The following day, I saw the newest schlocky action flick called Shadow Force. Is this movie bad? No, not really. Is it good though? See previous answer. Shadow Force was definitely a victim of a deceptive trailer, though not in the way that most people would expect. I went in thinking it would be a shitty action movie, a likely 2 or 3 out of 10. But it was a lot better than that, well, if only slightly. The story is your bog standard people left evil organization want to have a normal life plot, but it was told really well, which was a big surprise to me. Though I think the main reason for that is the kid in the movie, played by Jalil Kamara, and he was phenomenal, especially at bringing levity to scenes where it was desperately needed. That being said, though, Kerry Washington and Mark Strong seemed too big of actors to be in this kind of movie. One thing that kept nagging me throughout the runtime was that this felt more like a sequel than a standalone action movie, and I couldn't help but focus on that rather than the action that was happening on screen. I kept wondering if I was behind on the story, but nope, this movie is its own thing, and it was extremely mid, if only slightly better, earning it a 5.5 out of 10. Following that up was a fan event that I wish I had missed for the weekend's newest foray into acting, Hurry Up Tomorrow. And it is far and away the strangest ad for a new album that I have ever seen. It is also a movie full of contradictions. It is the longest 2-hour movie that I've ever watched that flew by in a flash. So much happened, but nothing happened at the same time. The Weeknd is a whiny little prick the entire movie, but he's also the only likable character in the whole thing. It kept my attention for the duration, but I was bored for most of the movie. I honestly have no clue how to feel about this movie as a whole, because it was just so meh for the whole of the runtime to the point where I was yawning and just plain tired because it wasn't really that interesting. The strangest thing, though, is that the acting was decent from everyone, but at the point where everyone is a prick to everyone else and no one is likable, it's hard to root for anyone and thus hard to want to continue watching. I almost don't even want to give it a score this high, but it's getting a 2 out of 10, which still feels insanely generous. The next movie on the watch list was one whose prior installments scarred a whole generation, Final Destination Bloodlines. To say that this is the best one in the series would not be an incorrect statement, and that's not just recency bias or because of updated visual effects. The story is more coherent than the rest, the deaths are mostly more creative, it follows the rules set up from the other movies, and overall it's just better acted. That's not to say it's a perfect movie though. They follow the same trope from previous movies in the series where people don't believe in the premonitions despite the deaths coming true, trying to cheat death in various ways. Like, don't get me wrong, it was still a really good movie and I had a great time watching it, but it just kept to the formula and didn't try anything new, even reusing deaths from previous movies. That being said, though, there were some new creative deaths that legitimately shocked me. It was great, and I would love to see more in the series. This movie gets a 7.5 out of 10, and may Tony Todd rest in peace. Following that was The Ruse, and the only ruse this movie used was trying to get you to think it's a good movie. There are times when indie movies are some of the best ones released in a month, but this one just was not it. All of the acting felt like the lines were changed minutes before shooting. There was a new establishing shot after every scene just to let you know that it was a new scene. And the titular ruse was so convoluted that it just fell flat. I think it was also a case of the story being smarter than the writer, because it was trying too hard to be smart, from the old woman to the police to the antagonist, and none of it ever really worked. The only good thing about this movie really was the scenery, but that was not enough at all to save it, which gives this movie a 2.5 out of 10. The second of the screen unscenes, this time a Scream unseen, for the month of May. The next movie I saw was Bring Her Back. And so I'm never seeing this again, but I mean that in the best way possible. It's one of those movies that you experience once and think, yeah, nah, I'm good, fuck this, but again, in the best way possible. The way that the directors are able to unnerve the audience is just superb. And the whole movie, from the acting to the story to the set design, everything is just amazing. The first half of the movie, you're waiting for stuff to get messed up, but in the second half, you're wanting desperately for it to go back to the normality of the first half. And the acting is just amazing from everyone, especially Sora Wong, the girl who plays Piper, who is absolutely perfect for the role. For the faint of heart, watch this with the lights on, wrapped in the fuzziest blanket, and squeezing the absolute hell out of your favorite stuffed animal, because holy shit, this was absolutely terrifying and unnerving. A more than perfect 11 out of 10 from me. Now, excuse me as I go sit in a bright room squeezing the shit out of my giant otter plushie from Dave & Buster's. Next up was The Last Rodeo, the latest movie from Angel Studios, and as with most, if not all, movies released by them, this movie can be described as good, but not great, but also not bad. The stunt work in this was absolutely insane, because I'm fairly certain that they had people doing actual rodeo rides for the shot of those actions. The acting was superbly okay from everyone outside of Neil McDonough, Michael T. Williamson, and Christopher McDonald, but that could also be because I'm pretty sure the other competitors in the rodeo were just actual bull riders that they cast because of the stunts required. The story was your typical feel-good stuff from an Angel Studios production, but it still worked. Good, not great, but also not bad. It's getting a good, not great, but also not bad score of 6.5 out of 10 from me. The award, though, for most disappointing movie of the month has to go to the next movie I saw, which was the live-action Lilo and Stitch remake. And personally, there are 3 ways to look at this version of Lilo and Stitch. The first is a direct live-action adaptation of the source material. The second is taking the source material and making some changes to modernize it. And the third is to view it as a completely original story with no relation to any kind of source material. The only worlds in which this movie, at least story-wise, is at least okay, maybe good-ish if you're feeling generous, are the second and third worlds. In the first, it's absolutely terrible. It unnecessarily changes a lot of the story, including the most heartwarming aspects of the original, and it completely changes the motivations of a few characters that makes them nearly unrecognizable. The acting was fine from the adults and from Stitch, but there was a lot of screaming from Lilo that just felt off and annoying most of the time. The emotional bits didn't hit at all, and with the Disney story, that's kind of what you're hoping for. Plus, there was a really stupid Chekhov's gun that was seemingly a couple of throwaway lines in the beginning and middle of the movie, which I just absolutely hated. It was so dumb. I was hoping that this would be at least moderately good, but it just wasn't. So it's getting a 3 out of 10. The next day, I saw something that was supposedly funny, but I just couldn't find any humor in it. Friendship, starring Tim Robinson and Paul Rudd. Now, I can understand how Tim Robinson's brand of comedy is funny to some people, and this movie did get some half-hearted chuckles out of me, but it just wasn't that great of a comedy, or even a movie for that matter. The acting was okay, but the story just goes off the rails for seemingly no reason, and it was super weird but also weirdly grounded, which was super off-putting to me. The thing that bugged me the most was the fact that Craig, Tim Robinson's character, was the most passive protagonist that I have seen in a while. He doesn't go out of his way to do anything. He's just constantly being told what to do by other people. So when he does try to do something of his own, it goes wrong in the most spectacular ways. Plus, everyone just beats him down for seemingly no reason other than he's slightly weird, which feels really mean-spirited and just off, and it's the only real quote-unquote joke through the whole movie. It just didn't resonate with me all that much, which is why it only gets a 3.5 out of 10. Hitting the home stretch, we started off the last week of May with the latest and greatest in Tom Cruise's filmography, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. And I think that bigger, better, and longer has to be the motto for the Mission Impossible series, because this one has the biggest set pieces, the best action, and is the longest movie in the series, but in no way is any of what I previously said a bad thing. Well, maybe except for the length of the movie. Unfortunately, it did seem to drag some things out a bit too long, and I understand why, but it did not have to be almost 3 hours long. The story was a great send-off to nearly 30 years of storytelling from Tom Cruise and the whole team behind these movies, and just everything about it was fantastic. There were a few action scenes that were spliced together between two separate locations that were happening at the same time that were just fantastic, and I was legitimately on the edge of my seat for most of the movie, wondering exactly how they were going to get through the events of the movie. It was an impossible feat to send this thing off on a high note, but just like Ethan Hunt in these movies, they chose to accept that task and succeeded in so many insane ways, which is why this movie earns a 9.5 out of 10. Next up was a legacy sequel in the form of Karate Kid Legends, and it was just plain fun. It was everything that a legacy sequel should be. A new story with new characters that brings back old faces, but keeps the focus on the new characters. The pacing of said story could have used a lot of work to make it flow better, and there was a side plot that felt out of place and didn't really have much of an impact on the overall story, but it was all performed phenomenally. Ben Wang had a standout performance as Li Fong, the new kid in the Big Apple, who pretty much follows the same story beats as Danny from the first movie, but I think that's okay, at least for this story. Jackie Chan was a joy to watch as always, and Ralph Macchio was able to step back into Danny's shoes with ease, showing how much he has grown from the ending of his primary story. Ming-Na Wen was sadly underutilized in this movie though, given more of a stern backseat role than anything major, but luckily this movie knew exactly what it wanted to do. Tell a new version of the Karate Kid story and get out, and that's exactly what it did. It didn't try to do anything fancy and new, which was greatly appreciated, and that's why it earns a 7.5 from me. The penultimate movie of the month was another letdown, but more from a deceptive trailer perspective. Tornado, a story about a Japanese puppeteer's daughter getting caught up with criminals when their show crosses paths with a crime gang. No joke, I had to pull that description from IMDb because I couldn't remember anything about it. The story and acting were both as bland as plain white bread, the acting was anything but fun to watch, and it was overall just not great. Another instance of the trailer making it seem better than it was, which is kind of unfortunate given some of the actors that were present, like Tim Roth, Rory McCann, and Takahiro Hira. It was just overall disappointing and not a very fun watch, earning it a paltry 2 out of 10. Finishing up the month on its last day, I walked into a rom-com about French people called Jane Austen Wrecked My Life. Not much to say about it really, but it was really cute, and I'm not usually a fan of rom-com or rom-dram movies as a whole. The whole story is reliant on a few coincidences that happen really close together in time, and other plot points that don't go anywhere, but other than that, it was really solid. The cast was great, and the location that they used for the set was absolutely gorgeous. Not really sure what else to say about it, but I would recommend it if you're in a bit of a sappy mood. It'll get a 7 out of 10 for me, all things considered. In the month of May, I saw a total of 20 movies for an average rating of exactly 5.6. I walked into 2 of those movies, not knowing what I was seeing, those being Fight or Flight and Bring Her Back. Luckily, I only had to pay for one of those movies, being the first screen unseen, so I only paid $6 for tickets, which means I saved a total of $251.02. Holy shit. To give a brief recap of the quality of movies in order, according to me, we had Bring Her Back at 11, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning at 9.5, Words of War at 9, Thunderbolts at 8.5, Final Destination: Bloodlines and Karate Kid Legends both at 7.5, Jane Austen: Wrecked My Life at 7, The Last Rodeo at 6.5, Watch the Skies at 6, Fight or Flight and Shadow Force tied at 5.5, Clown in a Cornfield at 5, Rosario and Juliet and Romeo both sitting at 4, The Surfer and Friendship both getting 3.5, Lilo and Stitch getting 3, The Ruse at 2.5, and Hurry Up Tomorrow and Tornado both getting 2. As is common at this point, if you want any full reviews of a movie on this list, spoilers and all, go ahead and ask in the comments, and I'll see about making a video on it, depending on life stuff that happens. With everything tallied up, I've now seen 82 movies 5 months into the year, and again, holy shit. June should be a bit of a breather, but I won't know until the next video comes out. We'll see though. Until then, I'll see you in the next one, and who knows, maybe you'll see something that I saw. Happy viewing!